What happened to Path of Exile 2? Well, Path of Exile 2 is delayed again. Everyone knows this game has been delayed plenty, both internally and externally. The story of this as of yet unreleased game, which wasn't originally a sequel, is fascinating, from its stunning beginning to its tumultuous present path. POE2 seeks to conglomerate everything the esteemed Grinding Gear Games team has learned while developing Path of Exile 1 from its humble beginnings in 2007 and onward. It's a story you want to know from beginning to end. It also compiles all the tremendous mistakes of competitors and looks to remedy or avoid them entirely, but also realizes some competitors innovate in areas wherein Grinding Gear Games currently falls short, and others take something Path of Exile already does and they do it better. Instead of ignoring said competition, GGG aims to take any learnings and break onto the scene with Path of Exile 2 by smashing any competitors, plain and simple. That's why it keeps getting stalled out, right? The Path of Exile 2 team, led by game director and GGG co-founder Jonathan Rogers, wants to cook and make the best possible game. As Jonathan said in his recent interview with Talkative, hello. If they discover a better game within the game they're developing, they need to make that game. There's a ridiculous amount of juice packed into Path of Exile 2's development. This overload of narrative twists and turns has led to people from the community, whether it's content creators, Redditors, and people on the street asking, what happened to Path of Exile 2?
What happened to Path of Exile 2?
So, what happened to Path of Exile 2?
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 We're going to fully answer that question in 5 complete points right now. In 2019, the next huge Path of Exile reveal was just around the corner. Everyone called it 400, the developers, content creators, and players. It was supposed to be the next era of Path of Exile. 100 was the initial release of the game back in October 2013. 200 was the game's first substantial patch in July 2015. 300 was the largest addition to the game in its history and a complete surprise to most of the player base in August 2017. Players expected 400 to be even larger, but even the best among them had no clear idea of what it could entail. However, they did know it was to be showcased at Path of Exile's first convention deemed ExileCon, which took place in Auckland, New Zealand in November 2019. Even minutes before the reveal, some of the biggest creators in the space had no clue what was about to happen.
So this was a convention formed around a massive expansion.
Yes.
Rather than the other way around. That's wild.
That's right. We didn't make 400 a few weeks ago just to have some content to show at ExileCon.
Are you saying you've actually prepared for this?
There has been some work. We made a video, you'll see it, and I wrote some slides last night, quite late.
Moments later, the 3 Grinding Gear Games co-founders took the stage in front of thousands of raging exiles in the flesh, and hundreds of thousands more scattered across the globe, tuning in via YouTube and Twitch. After thanking everyone for attendance, explaining the sheer magnitude of the event and the wild history of PoE, they finally revealed 400.
Well, that feels amazing. Thank you. Path of Exile 2.
That's correct. 400 was now called Path of Exile 2 externally. It was to be a massive expansion to the base game, so massive it warranted the name of a sequel. Players would be able to play the usual campaign and endgame alongside a brand new campaign, a suite of new and updated skills, characters, items, and more. The entire game was set to be overhauled graphically, and animations were receiving a brunt of the focus too. Anything ever wrong with Path of Exile 1 was supposed to be fixed with the Path of Exile 2 update, and how could it not be, right? Just watch that incredible reveal trailer's first few seconds once more.
The gods are dead, but left on their own, men will always seek to take their place.
Criminals! Your sentence is to be hanged from the neck until dead. Let your souls feed the first ones, and your bodies feed the land.
The only result is pain and death.
The demon is escaping! Kill her!
Get her.
Now, there wasn't yet a release date, but GGG estimated a beta would begin sometime in 2020, and as the hype of ExileCon and the POE2 announcement echoed into the distance, all grew more and more quiet. Between the initial reveal in November 2019 and the next massive update in July 2023, there was only one other announcement regarding Path of Exile 2's development. POE2 was announced in November 2019 to extreme excitement, then there was silence until April 2021, when GGG popped up with a POE2 reveal alongside the Path of Exile 1 expansion livestream for Ultimatum. The POE2-centric reveal showcased two new weapon types in Path of Exile 2 for the first time, the crossbow and spear.
Welcome to Path of Exile 2's second act. As you saw in the trailer, Act 2 is centered around a caravan of Maraketh called the Ardura who live in the Vastiri Desert.
Crossbows were supposed to be slower, a more methodical version of bows, with many different bolt types to go along with them. Spears aim to be a sly mix between melee and ranged, with characters being rewarded for hopping in and out of close quarters combat. The POE2 team also highlighted multiple paths in Act 2, demonstrating the graphic, sound, story, and design leaps the game was evidently making. This would also be the last time we would see Chris Wilson talking about Path of Exile 2 publicly as an authority. More on that later. After this Ultimatum and POE2 announcement, however, there was a curious silence about the game. There still wasn't a beta in sight, and people were wondering what was going on with POE2's development. Seriously, what was happening behind the scenes? Obviously, big POE1 expansions were releasing, but the POE2 news landscape was a barren wasteland. Was it dead? Was it delayed? Was it becoming a phone game? Well, Grinding Gear Games decided they'd reveal more about POE2 at a huge showcase, ExileCon 2 or ExileCon 2023, a whole 4 years after the initial announcement. Everyone expected the second ExileCon to be the floor for a Path of Exile 2 release date announcement. After all, the huge expansion to Path of Exile had been cooking since 2017 now. Again, people had no idea what to expect, even the experts.
What about yourself, Rise?
I think I'm going off the deep end. No POE2, POE3. Okay.
On only mobile, only period mobile.
Oh, no, wait a minute. No, I don't want to go there.
So they combine them, right? 2, 1, POE3.
There you go.
Makes
That's
sense.
the way to do it.
At Path of X.
There you
It's
go.
all one platform.
Just minutes after, GGG veteran Chris Wilson briefly took the stage to announce the transfer of leadership on Path of Exile 2. It'd now be Jonathan Rogers and Mark Roberts leading the charge on POE1's comprehensive expansion. Jonathan was another GGG co-founder, but Mark was not an OG. He was a player turned QA expert turned designer turned game director at the company. Then we had our first glimpse of POE2 since April 2021.
Alright, so this might be a good time to mention that in POE2, If you die to the boss, you have to start again from the start. There's no boss cheesing.
Path of Exile 2 looked breathtaking, and oh so different. 12 total classes, 36 ascendancy classes, hundreds of new monsters and bosses, tons of items with at least one unique item for every base type, gold in the game, and much more? How could this all be an expansion to Path of Exile 1? Well, that was simple. It wasn't.
There was a point when we realized that our plan to replace POE1 with POE2 would essentially be getting rid of a game that people love for no real reason. So we made a decision. Path of Exile 1 and 2 will be separate, with their own mechanics, balance, endgames, and leagues.
The new leadership quickly announced POE2 was no longer a POE1 expansion. It was its own independent game with shared microtransactions. Anything you bought for POE1 and could be used in POE2, like stash tabs, armor skins, or cosmetic pets, would transfer from one game to the other. However, in all other respects, POE2 would be independent and free to play. Some leagues would transfer, albeit altered and updated, like Delirium. An endgame mapping system would be present from the outset, as would be pinnacle bosses. It was a tremendous promise, and an even bigger leap in development from GGG. They would be running 2 ARPGs at once. Players were floored. Many didn't even know what to think. Then, GGG hit everyone with yet another doozy. When exactly would people be able to play this game in any form?
So your next question is likely to be, when is the beta? Well, we're in our last year of development, but we're still finishing acts, adding skills, and balancing everything. The closed beta is going to start on June 7th, 2024. Path of Exile 2 has been a long time coming, and we're incredibly excited to be near the finish line, but we're just not quite there yet. We're determined not to rush this and make sure we get everything right.
That's right. People would finally get their hands on POE2 in June of 2024. And ExileCon 2023 was just the beginning of the tremendous Path of Exile 2 news cycle. You could feel the hype immediately die down in the room, in Twitch chat, on Reddit. People wouldn't be able to play the game for just under a year on their own PCs. However, with the end of ExileCon 2023, the hype began to truly build. ExileCon 2023's announcements only scratched the surface in terms of POE2 information. Afterward, we kept learning more and more about the game. We saw our first real glimpse of the Druid and shapeshifting at Gamescom 2023. Not only would POE2's version of shapeshifting look and feel meatier than any other ARPG in the past, it would seamlessly flow together with mixed spellcasting skills, non-shifting weapon attacks, and automated summoner skill combos. We experienced utter shock when grinding your games revealed the Mercenary, basically guns in POE2, and WASD controls near the end of 2023. If the totally not gun crossbows didn't amp your hype levels up to 1,000, then the boss fight at the end of the showcase surely did. It was some of the darkest content I've seen in a game in a bit.
My dear child, your time has come.
By the gods.
Then during the holidays in early January, Jonathan Rogers went bananas on Reddit and answered tons of questions about Path of Exile 2. He mused about game development, explored the possibility of endgame and early game changes, and even gave us a glimpse of what the Mercenary looked like under his helmet. He and a few other GGG developers also took long-form interviews from large creators like Scissorin, Kriparian, DM, Gazzy, and Woody Joe, as well as a few others. Each interview gave new tidbits of information showcasing the sheer scope of POE2. It'd have instant buyout trading, for example, which was a leap forward from POE1. All these podcasts led up to Exile Meet, a mini ExileCon in Los Angeles, California, in which over 50 content creators were invited to play POE2 and learn all about the next era of PoE. Many believed it would contain information about POE2's closed beta, a launch date for the real game, and much more. This video is merely going to be a predictions video on what we are going to find out at Exile Meet about Path of Exile 2. Prediction number 1 is simple. We will see the Ascendancy classes in Path of Exile 2. Time to move on over to prediction number 2, which is we will get the official way or method to access Path of Exile 2's closed beta at Exile Meet and on the Reveal livestream on March 21st. It's time for prediction number 3, which is Grinding Gear Games will announce ExileCon 2024. In prediction number 4, at Exile Meet, we will get a glimpse or deeper information about the end game of Path of Exile 2. However, many were incorrect in this assumption, including myself. Instead, Exile Meet highlighted plenty of awesome new content about POE2, including the first showcase of the Ranger and her impressive arsenal of ranged weaponry, and the reveal of mounts in Path of Exile 2. Additionally, and most importantly, at Exile Meet, Jonathan Rogers himself delivered a bit of unfortunate and honestly shocking in the moment news.
Now there is just one more unfortunate bit of news that I have to tell you, and that is that Path of Exile 2's beta is going to unfortunately be delayed. We previously said that we'd get the beta out on June 7th, and while I think that we will be able to get the game's content ready in time, we sort of underestimated how long it would take to get the gameplay polished to a standard that we're actually happy with. When we actually come to kind of like do all this content, it turns out that like getting it actually to the point where like we're ready for someone to actually play it is a little bit harder than we expected. So we're actually not going to move any of our internal deadlines. We're still going to be having an alpha at the time we're still going to have the beta before, but I don't think we're quite going to be ready to show it to the public at that point. And so what that means is that I don't have an exact date for you, but it should be towards the end of the year rather than the middle of the year like we were saying before. And yeah, that unfortunately is a bit of a pain. It certainly pains me to say it, but yeah, we'll be having the beta towards the end of the year.
So, Path of Exile 2's closed beta, and therefore POE2 itself, was delayed again, indefinitely this time. While the closed beta is supposed to be around the end of this year, it's obviously a date that can change, if GGG deems it so. What sparked this? Well, if you've been paying close attention to this video, all of this information packed into a single place, it should be evident. Path of Exile 2 experienced an insane amount of scope and feature creep, and the crazier thing, much of it was justified. The game began as a mere overhaul of the starting POE1 experience, updated graphics, animations, and the like. However, what began as just an Act 1 overhaul transformed into something far larger, and in the words of some, grotesque.
So effectively, Path of Exile 2 is a like weird cancerous growth from POE1 that kind of metastasized into its own entity.
Path of Exile 2 was an outgrowth of Path of Exile 1 that far outweighed its predecessor, even before it officially launched. When it began as just an expansion, the number of changes, additions, rewrites, and alterations it took was too substantial, so they split it out into its own campaign. Then, once the list of changes grew too great there and POE2 took on a life of its own, they split it into its own game. But that didn't stop its unprecedented growth. GGG added a new control scheme in the form of WASD to further modernize and revolutionize the genre. They kept updating graphics and animations to ensure they were of utmost quality. They brought in completely bizarre aspects to the game like mounts, and I'm sure even more wild, unannounced content awaits us. However, that's all this is right now. Announcements, news, fascinations. When will we get our hands on Path of Exile 2? Well, after seeing what happened to Path of Exile 2 firsthand, you should know. We'll get our hands on Path of Exile 2 when the developers believe it's ready. Imagine you're preparing an amazing present for your significant other. You're putting a ton of work into it and you've told them to expect something incredible, better than anything you've ever given them before. There's no real date on the delivery, just that it's on the way and you'll get it sometime soon. Every time you get close to finishing it out, you realize it could be improved in some way. A little reference to a personal event here, shining it up a bit right there, maybe there's a better moment to show it off? Would you rather just hand it over with a wart or two intact, or wait until you think it's exactly what you would like to deliver to your significant other? Well, there are pros and cons to either decision. Delays can bring about dissatisfaction and resentment, arguments about false promises and the like. Handing it over early can result in a subpar product, a less than stellar reception, and thoughts of what could have been. This is exactly what Grinding Gear Games is going through with Path of Exile 2 right now. Do they keep delaying and making the game as perfect as possible? Or do they release what they view as a less than excellent product? I know my thoughts on the matter. They're quite simple. Let them cook. GGG is delaying for a reason. They've been explicit about what they're adding and why they're adding it. As long as the transparency continues, I'm good with it, even if I'm a bit burned by the further delays. Seriously, POE2 has been in development since 2017. This is wild. They are not burdened by competition. They are not worried about financials. POE1 is performing just fine. They are merely concerned with crafting the best possible ARPG in the scene. In the eyes of their overarching leader, Jonathan Rogers, they are on the road to do just that. I pose the question to you. Do you care about GGG, the development of POE2, and how it initially hits the gaming landscape? We see why the delays have happened, how the teams have changed over time, and why the developers know they have a single opportunity to get the launch right. What's the benefit to releasing an unfinished product? This was an exhaustive story, and it took a ton of time to put it together. If you'd like more in-depth tales such as this about Path of Exile and other games, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. If you don't, it's possible I get exiled from the POE community. But seriously, this is just a tiny slice of the whole story that is Path of Exile 2. If you're curious exactly what one of the most exciting changes coming with POE2 is, make sure you watch this video about WASD right now.